back to episode 5 of the Strategy Edge podcast. In the first part of this episode, we navigated the labyrinth of CX and NPS intricacies and focused on the vital role of actionable insights with none other than brand interventionist and author of 10 Reasons Why CX NPS Programs Fail, Christopher Roberts. With Chris, we scrutinized the relevance of simplistic surveys, pondered the dangers of fixating on scores, and emphasized the need for diversified survey designs. Now, in this segment, which is the second part of episode 5, our conversation with Chris Roberts further untangles the web, delving into survey lengths, frequencies, and strategic identification of critical areas shaping customer experiences and overall CX NPS scores. Join me as we unravel with Chris the remaining layers of this fascinating conundrum. How frequently do you think businesses should survey their customers? Since you said it should be a healthy mix of the transactional and the relationship surveys, and how frequent it should be to obtain those kind of reliable insights without overwhelming their customers or the
Yeah.
respondents.
So I think with transactional surveys, once every 3 to 4 months is good. If you go to them every month with a survey, they will get angry. And then when it comes to relationship surveys, they're longer surveys, they're more strategic. Once every 6 months is the ideal time frame for that. People will bear that. But look, I have to share this anecdote with you. I went to this resort outside of Bangalore called Orange County, and I noticed that the place was like Shangri-La. When I say that, I mean like everything was spot on perfect. The rooms were spotless. The staff were very friendly, genuine smiles, not fake smiles. The food was amazing, and I'll tell you about the food. It was buffet, and they were like breakfast, lunch, dinner. And because it was India, there were 7 odd dishes that stayed the same, but the other like 20 odd dishes kept changing. So there was a big variety of dishes for the 3 days that we were there. They had cultural occasions and all. Now, every key thing that happened, like you showed up for a meal, they would make you fill in a 4 question survey. Now, in 3 days, so 3 meals, that means 3 of those. Then every cultural event, another 4 question survey. Then I went for a massage, another 4 question survey. And you go, don't you get tired of doing the surveys? You don't. You know why you don't? Because it is such a good experience, and you actually want to give them feedback. One, because they're good, you want to tell them how good they are. And two, if something is wrong, you want to actually help them and you want to give them constructive feedback. And I spoke to the GM of the place. I said, what do you actually do with all this stuff? He said, we look at the feedback every day and we make adjustments. So the thing is, if you are engaged with the brand, you will take time to fill in the survey. If you're not engaged with the brand, like I said, there are other issues at play.
Right. From your experience, how can businesses identify critical areas or actions that they have and the potential to substantially impact customer experience and overall CX and PS scores?
Yeah. So the way we actually do it is a few different things. It's not just one thing. We look at key touch points, value proposition elements, sometimes brand attributes. We look at the mean rating score for that particular element. Let's just say contact center or sales. And then the next thing, we look at the correlation to the NPS score. So how much is it impacting the NPS score? So you know how correlation works. Uh, the sales of ice cream goes up as the temperature goes up. Your blood pressure goes up as you eat more salt, as an example. The sales of beer goes up, as the temperature goes up as well. And that's a positive correlation. The perfect correlation is 1. That means if one unit goes up by 1, the other one goes up by 1 as well, right? That's a very strong correlation. So it typically ranges from +1 to -1. Negative correlation is when one aspect goes up and the other aspect goes down. So, for example, look, thinking about beer as an example, the more beer you drink, your IQ drops, right? So that's a negative correlation. So that helps us work out. One is your rating score and your correlation. We typically say you need a desirable score is around 8 out of 10. Anything less than that means you've got work to do, correct? If your correlation is high, like I said, it's impacting, and your rating is low, it's an area of focus or priority. Okay. And if, as an example, the correlation is not that high, but your rating is still low, it's an area of improvement. You need to improve it because people don't like certain aspects. The flip side of it is if the correlation is high and your rating is also high, that's your strength. You need to really leverage it. And we see that a lot. And then you have some things that are a low correlation and a high score. So you're doing well in them, but they're not that important in the scheme of things. Okay. So that's one thing we use. So we call this a driver chart, and we use that to actually help people work out what they need to do. The important point is to have this type of insights available at a brand level, but down to a team level, down to a functional level. So every team, every function can look at it and say, what do we need to do? So if you took like a contact center example, you'd go brand level, contact center level, at a team level. So every team leader can look at it and say, what does my team have to do? And it's very important to make this granular, because if it's not granular, then there's no line of sight. And you don't know exactly what you should do to improve. That's one aspect, right? The second aspect is distribution. So I believe life is a normal distribution. So you have some things that are good, some things that are bad, some things that are in the middle. So you need to look at who or what is either creating promoters or creating detractors. So what I mean by that is you might have 10 products. So which product has a high score, which product has a low score? You might have 10 contact center teams. Which teams are performing well, which teams are not performing well. You might have regions, and one region is doing well, one region is not doing well. And this is where the insights come in terms of two things. One is if something is broken, you fix it. The second thing is if you're doing something well, you find out what it is and you distill it down and then you share best practice. That's the second part of the insights. And the third part is by segment. So you might look at it by segment and say, we're getting a high NPS score for our low value customers, but our high value customers are not happy. Normally, B2B, we do decision maker, influencer, end user. You might say, end users are really happy with us, but decision makers are very unhappy. So, strategically, that's an issue.
Right.
So, these three things in combination is what we use to actually get down to some strategic insights so that you can really improve the business. So, for example, first is like a combination of correlation and rating scores. The second is the distribution, who is creating promoters or detractors. Third is by segment, and then look at it and say, what's working, what's not working, how can we share best practice?
Right. So, once these actionable insights are identified, how can businesses leverage them effectively to bolster operations and to deliver exceptional customer experiences? You did briefly touch upon it in the previous answer, but if you could just elaborate on it, maybe with an example, that'll be great.
So, first of all, you develop your customer strategy. Then you survey the customer strategy to say, how are we performing? Once you do that, you then identify key drivers or pain points, and you have a prioritized set of recommendations. So you have to work on the basis that everyone is busy. And even if a brand is completely broken and there are 10 things they need to improve, I never recommend that they fix 10 things because they'll never do it.
Right.
So you need to actually have a very prioritized set of recommendations. So let's just say three or four things. That is usually manageable. Once you fix that, you can do another three or four. You try to do too much and then nothing really happens. So how do you actually go from the recommendations to action planning? So there's two aspects to it. The first one is a top-down action planning, and that's like a helicopter view, and the people involved in that are like senior functional heads, as an example, and I usually facilitate it because a lot of the issues will be cross-functional. And then we pick the key team, and then we I facilitate an ideation session where people come up with a set of initiatives, and then those initiatives that culminate into an action plan. And then you've got to have a proper governance process to make sure all these actions get implemented. Now, that's one aspect, top down, and that's strategic. But the other aspect that is, even more powerful in a way is the bottom up ideation. So at a team level, you go to a call center team or a sales team or a regional team or a marketing team, and you go, okay, let's look at our particular score, and for our particular region, let us come up with some improvement initiatives. So you
Right.
have a top down approach, you have a bottom down up approach, and you have all these initiatives floating around. Obviously, you need a governance process because someone needs to make a decision as to which initiatives are going to go ahead and which ones are not going to go ahead. And then you need some way of monitoring how that is going. And you need a governance structure to do that. And let me tell you, in the governance structure, the most important thing is to have the right C-level people involved in the governance structure. Because if it's an organizational goal to improve your NPS score, you can't have some mid-management team running it. In the governance, you've got to have some senior executives, and those senior executives, two things. One is they know what the organization is doing to improve its net promoter score, so they have visibility of that. Two is if you have an initiative and you can't get it through, they are the ideal people to actually push it through the organization and remove any roadblocks. So when
Right.
they are in a meeting, as an example, with the CEO, when the CEO says, "Hey, so what's happening with NPS?" they can confidently talk about, "Oh, we are doing A, B, C, D, E, F, G to improve the scope." So it's very important. And third part about having the executive in this governance structure is the fact that staff then know that the organization is taking it very seriously.
Right. So, Chris, there's this one concept that you've spoken about in several instances elsewhere where you talk about the one thing. So, can you explain this concept of the one thing and its application in driving improvements, especially focusing on specific brands or functions or teams within an organization?
Yeah, so as you've heard, in all my podcasts, my whole idea is focus on executing a few things and doing it really well rather than trying to do too much and not doing anything well. If you give people or teams two or three things to do, they'll execute it well. But if you give them like seven things, they won't do any of it well.
Right.
So a lot of what I do, you have to work on the basis that people are busy. They're not just sitting around waiting for the NPS program to give them some work to do, right? So in that scenario, you've got to actually prioritize your recommendations and fix it. And once you fix it, then move to the next. So I'm a big believer in the 80-20 rule, which is literally kind of Pareto's principle that says, 20% of initiatives will give you 80% of your results. And that's the role we play with businesses to go, look, I think you should do this instead of that. So what should you focus on first, second, third? What will give you biggest bang for buck? Now, the one thing, which is a book written by Gary Keller, which I would highly recommend that people read, um, is the next level. It's like the 80-20 rule on steroids. So, if there was only one thing you could do, what would that be? For example. To give you an example of that, as a team, if there was only one thing you could do, what would that be? And the driver charts, the distribution, all that stuff I took you through helps you identify what that is. Now, the one thing you need to do, let's just say globally, you might say, we need to invest in staff knowledge. Fair enough. But then by brand, by function, by team, you might want to do different things. So, as an example, the operational team, their one thing might be X. The supply chain team, it might be Y. Someone else, it might be something else. And then, of course, the most important part of this is the granular insights. You can't have just one head office kind of score and expect people to come up with the one thing for themselves. So that's what the one thing is. If you could just do one thing this month, this quarter, what would that be? You do it, then you move to the next one thing. It's not like you just do one thing for like years. Finish that one thing off, move to the next one thing. That's
Right.
what it.
Right. Great, Chris. Wonderful insights and a lot of great advice. So, as we conclude this episode, I'm sure you agree that we've unraveled the significance of actionable insights that go beyond just the CX and NPS scores. So, do join us in the next episode of the Strategy Edge, where we'll explore the critical role of insights and building employee accountability at a granular level. discover how insights drive accountability and reshape organizational strategies for exceptional outcomes. Thank you, Chris, once again, and looking forward to meeting you in the next episode.
Thank you, Keertana.